We have massive, overwhelming, incontrovertible, decisive evidence that all of the best diet patterns with regard to longevity, vitality, and the surrogate measures that happen faster, the rates of specific conditions like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, cancer, stroke, dementia. Overwhelming evidence that the theme of the optimal human diet is real food, plant predominant. Michael Pollan, of course, described it in 7 words. Eat food, meaning real food, not too much, mostly plants. That's pretty good. We can embellish that, and I do in The Truth About Food for a whole chapter. A diet mostly made up of whole, unprocessed or minimally processed vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. And when you're thirsty, most of the time, drink plain water. If you get that right in a balanced, sensible, and perhaps time-honored assembly, you simply can't go too far wrong. Once you go beyond that and start looking at particulars, what you wind up being able to do is say, here's evidence that supports one version, here's evidence that supports another version, but we really don't have the trial that directly compares them. So you all know. I suspect you wouldn't be here on a Saturday afternoon at a conference on Long Island if you weren't motivated by your knowledge that plant-based nutrition is not only good for coronary disease, isn't just good at preventing coronary disease, but can reverse coronary disease. And the evidence we have for that, the most direct evidence, relates to a low-fat version of the vegan diet. So a whole food, plant-exclusive, we say plant-based, but frankly a Mediterranean diet is overwhelmingly plants. It's plant-based. It's just not plant-exclusive. We're a little loosey-goosey with our terminology, to be honest. There's a difference between plant-predominant and plant-exclusive. Maybe we should say what we mean. Both of those are plant-based. The typical American diet is bacon-based, right? So there's a big difference between plant-based and processed meat-based. We'll come back to processed meat. But there's a much smaller difference between overwhelmingly plant-predominant and, for whatever reason, maybe ethics, maybe concern about the environment, maybe convictions about diet, plant-exclusive. So if you are looking for the evidence that you can regress coronary atherosclerosis, show that imagistically with serial coronary angiography, your choice is a low-fat version of a vegan diet, a whole food, plant-exclusive diet. However, it's easy to mislead and say we don't have comparable evidence for other diets. We heard about the Predimed trial last night. I don't think we heard about the Lyon Diet Heart Study. Maybe someone mentioned it along the way today. The Lyon Diet Heart Study, which generated publications between the early 1990s and the end of that decade, was a study enrolling several hundred people throughout Europe who had already had a heart attack, a secondary prevention trial. The question was, can we use food, specifically a Mediterranean diet, as medicine and fix the heart disease? And I'll spare you the gory details, but you can look up Lyon Diet Heart Study and you'll find the publications and all the commentaries. But this was a carefully controlled, randomized trial in people who'd had a heart attack. One of the main differences between this and the Predimed trial you may hear discussed is Predimed is a primary prevention trial. It's people who are healthy being encouraged to eat a Mediterranean diet or to maintain their current diet. Well, when you take healthy people and say you should eat this way or this way, the people who are assigned to their current diet generally make it a little better, and the people assigned to the intervention diet don't pay careful attention because they're feeling fine. So the result is you have two diets with very, very small differences. And a lot of what you hear about Predimed is somewhat misleading because the two groups were a lot alike. If you're looking to show that A causes different outcomes than B, then A and B can't be the same. Otherwise, you're looking for the difference between A and A, or A and A minus. They're too much alike to produce meaningful outcome differences. In the Lyon Diet Heart Study, these people had had a heart attack, they were scared. And so those that were assigned to the Mediterranean diet thought of it as a lifeboat. Said, hell yeah. And they dramatically changed their diet, and they cut out the fatty meats. They massively reduced their intake of saturated fat. They reduced their intake of processed food, although that's a much lesser issue in Europe than it is here. Again, I promise to spare you the gory details. When all was said and done over the span of a decade in hundreds of people, there was a 70 to 80% reduction in the rate of heart attack or death in the Mediterranean diet group versus the standard European diet. And that 70 to 80% reduction was exactly as good as what was shown in Ornish's heart disease reversal trial. Same. Now, here's the thing. Did they take serial pictures of coronary arteries in the Lyon diet heart study? They did not. Because for the most part, the studies that did that were much smaller, so a more intimate group undergoing serial angiography at one center. In the Lyon diet heart study, the participants were scattered all around Europe in multiple countries, and there was no legitimate medical need for them to all undergo repeat coronary angiography. What we might infer, however, is that since they were having fewer heart attacks, and since they weren't dying, their coronary disease was better. They weren't having angina, they weren't having heart attacks, they weren't being hospitalized, and they weren't dying at nearly the rate of the control. Their coronary disease was, for all practical purposes, better. Now, would it have looked better on a picture? I'm going to say something heretical, my friends. Who cares? I don't care what the inside of my coronaries looks like. I care about how I feel, how long I live, years in life, life in years. The only reason we care what coronaries look like from the inside out is because it's a potent predictor of, are you likely to have a heart attack? But we already got that answer. They had 70% fewer heart attacks. They had 70% less mortality. We got the definitive answer. When you jump over the sequence of outcome variables to the decisive one at the end of the line, the intermediate variables cease to matter. What we do not have is a comparison between a low-fat, whole food, plant-exclusive diet and the dietary assignment in the Lyon diet heart study. I can't say for sure which is better for human health. For purposes of the recent diet war that I witnessed, we have a narrower problem. We don't have a direct comparison over time to look at rates of heart attack, death, other chronic disease in people who go from the baseline diet, which I characterized for you last night as the seafood diet. I see food and I eat it, right? Most Americans are on the seafood diet. So if they went from that to an optimal, low fat, no fatty foods, no nuts, seeds, avocados, no added oil version of the whole food plant exclusive diet, a variant that allowed for nuts and seeds and avocado but no extracted oil, and yet a third variant which allowed for only the very healthiest extracted oils, extra virgin olive oil, for example. I'll come back to that in a second. Which of those would create the greatest benefit relative to the baseline diet, and how would they fare relative to one another? If I were designing the study, and again, I've made my living designing studies for the past 2 decades and more, I'd want to go further. I'd want to take people who are all on a typical American diet at baseline, standardize them to a run-in diet that's the same for everybody, and then randomly assign them to a differing sequence of different versions of a whole food plant exclusive diet with differing levels of fat for some number of weeks, and then measure everything we care about at the end of that, wash them out, cross them over, so everybody could actually be compared to him or herself with regard to inflammatory cytokines, lipid panel, measures of glycemic response and insulin sensitivity, and on it goes. It hasn't been done. That study actually could be done. We don't need 1 million pregnant women for 100 years to do that study. And I've actually had some correspondence with colleagues who are very interested in it. We can get that answer. But here's the thing, folks. We don't have it yet. And so what I plead with you and with my colleagues from the sidelines of this particular and I think relatively insular diet war is, let's be humble. Let's admit what we know, And if we want to superimpose on that personal preference, even if it comes strong, even if it's personal preference with a great deal of passion and conviction, let's make the distinction. Here's what we know. It's common. Common ground, common cause. In addition, I very much prefer this version because it's what I've worked with my entire career. I think that's perfectly fine. I know it best. I like it best. I've seen the results close up. I can put faces to the benefit of this approach. The others I've read about, they may be just as good, I don't know. If we could all do that, almost everything we want to espouse to a world that desperately needs to hear from us emanates from common ground, is configured into common cause. I think that's crucial.